Hello. Oh, it's been a while. Welcome back to another episode of Two Please. I'm your host, Abhin.
Good evening. I am your co-host Rohit Rao. I had to do
Okay, never mind.
it.
There goes our very bad Transylvanian accent because today's
Yeah,
episode is centered around vampires. Now, why vampires? Because the most obvious reason it's December 25th. Robert Eggers' Nosferatu, his remake of Nosferatu, is about to hit theaters. It's generating mad reviews across the board. People are really loving what they're seeing, and Rohit is excited for it. I am excited for it
yeah,
too. I think we'll both go watch it because nobody else cares much.
yeah.
But that brought about an interesting discussion. We kind of wanted to just, given the fascination of of the world of vampires in general, this is one of those episodes where we'll kind of dig a little deep into the lore behind the whole vampires, where it kind of originates from, as well as discuss its portrayal in media, how it has shifted over the last century or so. So it's going to be one of those fun, silly, but slightly more informative Two Please episodes, which I think is basically Two Please in general. But I don't know. Take of it what you will. Let's start the show.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure Abhin's aware. I don't know how much the rest of you are aware, but I have a slight fascination with vampires, to put it mildly.
I think.
I have, yeah.
I think generally, like when I pitched the idea to Rohit, I was like, he's like, "What do you want to talk about?" I said, "Vampires." He's like, "Cool." That was
Yeah,
the
I didn't even
extent
need
of it.
elaboration. I'm like,
Yeah, he's like,
we can. I have enough material.
"Yeah,
No, in
true. We
fact,
enough."
I have mentioned this somewhere in a prior episode, I'm sure, but my single favorite work of fictional literature is Bram Stoker's Dracula. In fact, there was a time when I could recite parts of it from memory because I've read the book cover to cover, the unabridged version, many times growing up. And in fact, probably my most favorite literary character comes from Dracula. I love Quincy Morris. He represents
Mhm.
uh, the platonic male ideal in my head.
Mhm.
Literally speaking, whatever. Sorry,
Mhm.
I bunked that word. But anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. All this to just say I have a lot to talk about regarding this subject. But like Abhin said, we can sort of start with a bit of history, then talk about
Mhm.
our experience with vampires growing up. What I mean is through cinema and TV shows, of course,
Mhm.
unless there's something you want to tell. And then we can sort of dovetail into
I
movies, pop culture.
mean, just look at
You
my
have a
teeth.
story.
For those, no, I mean, have you guys seen my canines? Okay, here's a secret. I think Rohit's about to notice it for the first time as well. I have for like generations been told I have vampiric teeth. Generations, I'm for like the last decade or so. I want to like run close up to the camera and show you my canines, and you can make a, a what you will.
Damn, dude. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some
So anyway,
sturdy canines.
yes. I don't know what it was. I think I just didn't have like the teeth here didn't really touch the top, so my canines just particularly grew. Long story short, I was never meant to be a vegetarian.
I have not seen you in the daytime for a while.
I
Hmm.
know we only meet in the evening.
Yeah, it's only the night walks. Hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And you've never had garlic bread. I've seen that too.
Yeah,
But
that's I'm
anyways,
off carbs.
uh, we can keep doing this. But okay,
Mm.
I'm quickly going to dive into a short history lesson. And when I say
Mhm.
history, we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of the vampiric legend, right? And
Mhm.
to the best of my knowledge, the concept of this creature of the night that sort of feeds off other people's blood, ergo their life force, is predominantly a very Eastern European legend, right?
Mhm.
Of course, thanks to Bram Stoker's Dracula, most people have associated the creature with the region of Transylvania, which today lies predominantly in Romania. Side note, when
Mhm.
I went to Romania, I dragged all of my friends to this random castle in the middle of nowhere just because the actual Dracula, which is Vlad Dracul, the third or the
Mhm.
second, spent a week
Mhm.
there, and they were like, "Dude, this is like the weirdest motivation to travel 120 kilometers away from Bucharest just to visit a random castle." But that's how invested I am. I am into vampires. But coming back,
Mhm.
right? So primarily a Eastern European folklore or legend, however you want to call it. Again, they have their own terms for it. Vampire is probably the most commonly known one today. The Polish, if I remember correctly, have a term called strigoi. In
Hmm.
fact, uh,
Gamer data.
there's a Guillermo del Toro
Hmm.
TV show which centers around this iteration of the legend. But the reason why, and again, I don't know what came first, right? Whether the legend was already there and was attributed to this person, or whether this person gave rise to the legend. But there was this Hungarian countess,
Hmm.
Elizabeth Bathory, I think late
Hmm.
17th century, who,
Hmm.
again, today we don't know whether it actually happened or she was, part of political, mudslinging. But it was alleged that she killed a lot of women that were, in service to her, or picked women from her subject class, and killed them, and apparently bathed in their blood to
Hmm.
preserve her youth and her youthful looks. Um, and probably where the whole vampiric legend came from, or like I said, the tag was attributed to her. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. I don't know how to make him stop. So in case you hear the odd bark now and then, there's this lot of work happening around the house. So you might hear Maximus on and off. But yeah, like
Yeah.
I was saying, Bathory was probably the most famous and probably the earliest air quotes real vampire, so to speak, that we've heard of. And what this led to, this whole mania, what it led to is in the late 18th century, early 19th century, there was a whole spate of, I don't know if you call it not grave robbery, but grave vandalization, right?
Hmm.
People who were suspected of being vampires, their graves would be dug up, and their bodies, which were at this point essentially skeletons, would be defiled, and their head would be cut off because the
Hmm.
folklore dictated that cutting the head off would kill the vampire, right? So not entirely fictitious in the sense that whether vampires exist or not, people genuinely believe they did for a fair amount of time. But all of that, was a largely Eastern European phenomenon. But the Western world, or the world where information got disseminated, that part of the world probably had a first taste of this vampiric legend thanks to John William Polidory's 1819 work called The
Hmm.
Vampire, spelled
Hmm.
PYR. And in fact, there's a very old chestnut from Quiz Funda from our circles, which talks about this sort of Avengers meetup that happened in 1816. Again, I'm going to spend a
Hmm.
quick minute on that because it's an amazing story. So this was 1816, which was called the year without a summer, because the
Hmm.
previous year there was a major volcanic eruption and ash had covered the atmosphere. So summers were there was the sunlight shining through. How apt. So it was called the year without a summer. Temperatures across the planet had plunged. So this autumn evening in 1816, in one room you had these people gathered, and these people were Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, P.B. Shelley, his wife Mary Shelley, and you had John William Polidori and a fifth person that I'm not remembering. So to while away the time, Lord Byron said, "Hey, let's make this a contest. Each of you take the night and come back to me tomorrow with a ghost story that you've written, right? Because how do we pass the time?"
Yeah.
And over the course of that night, of course, you had Polidori come up with the concept for vampire. But why the night is remembered a lot more in literature is it was the night that Mary Shelley came up with the idea for Frankenstein. Coincidentally, probably 100 odd years from then on is when you had the whole monsters universe, of which vampires and Frankenstein monster were the two stars of that entire universe. So you see how these things sort of have threads across the course of time. So anyway, we will address that period
Fucking
as we
brilliant
talk
story though.
about the
Like it's just
movies and
one
episodes.
of those moments where it's just it's one of those moments where it's like wow, that is ultimate. Like it's the
Yeah,
ultimate definition of lightning in a bottle. One night, right?
yeah,
One night you
yeah,
have five of these biggest authors, when who at that point had no idea their works would be remembered for like centuries, let alone decades.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just having all of those ideas culminate in one medium, and then having the entire medium shift by 100 years to film and to essentially films, is kind of an absolutely insane situation. I love that story. I want to like make that a real.
Yeah. So that's a little bit about the history of vampires with a little bit of Frankenstein thrown in, but we won't get too distracted. But yeah, that's how vampires, and of course, once obviously there was the vampire, but the far and away the reason why everybody knows about vampires is of course Bram Stoker's 1897 classic Dracula. Again, Bram Stoker himself never went to Transylvania. This is something I learned recently. But lived most of his life in the UK, I think, for the most part. Visited a few libraries, heard a few, stories in passing from people, and came up with the rest all on his own. And oh my God, like I don't think we have enough time for me to really get into the myriad ways in which I loved the book growing up. I was introduced to the epistolary novel concept through Dracula, which is essentially a story told through diary entries. And
Mhm.
even as a concept, it was completely new to me. I was like, I never thought a story could be told this way, right? And again, I mentioned earlier in earlier podcasts how I consider George R. R. Martin to be one of the best enders of chapters of a book. Right, he ends chapters brilliantly. I would put Bram Stoker in the same echelon, maybe a close second or third, because the way he ends, there's one especially where, again, I'm getting into detail. I can't help myself. There's one where the team encounters Dracula after he's come to the UK for the first time in this abbey in Carfax, or
Mhm.
Keanu Reeves says, Carfax. Right?
Carfax. Making the same.
Super tense moment, super tense meeting, and I remember reading it like even though these were words on paper, I was super scared. I was very nervous. And I was like, how is this book doing this to me, right? So, I mean, I'm just reminiscing about the electrifying experience I had reading it. But again, long story short, once Bram Stoker's Dracula came out, I think everybody knew about vampires, right? And a lot of the vampiric lore, with the whole stake through the heart, them being afraid of garlic and stuff like that, came about because of Bram Stoker, who pretty much sort of just invented a bunch of this, right? Like I said, the traditional folklore said you cut their neck stem off, like the final stem off, or cut their head off, is how you kill a vampire. This whole stake through the heart, garlic, and holy water, all of that was Bram Stoker's addition. But a
Hmm.
lot of that is now so inherent and like intrinsically baked into vampiric lore, shows you the impact of what he did, right? So yeah, there's that, and of course that sort of uh, dovetailed very well into the rise of the cinematic medium. This was, like I said, 1897. So what,
And I think about, yeah,
a
20,
few,
15 years later, there was
yeah,
the Lumiere brothers had, I mean, shocked the world with their first
yeah,
footage of a train.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
so forever changing the way media would be consumed, right?
And yes, of course, while we are probably going to talk about Bela Lugosi's the 1931 Bela Lugosi movie, it wasn't the first Dracula
Yeah.
movie. It just was the most famous one. That's the one that really took off, right? So yeah, I mean that's how vampires came into the cultural zeitgeist, and they remain in it to this day, as evidenced by the fact that both of us are super excited about Nosferatu, which is uh, how do I put this right? It is a version of the Dracula with enough tweaks so that the
It's
makers
not
didn't
really
get sued
Dracula.
by the estate of Bram Stoker. Yeah, but we'll talk
No,
about that
but
when we talk about Nosferatu. But yeah, that was my
mm,
little history lesson.
yeah, what a great time that was. Like, I had a great time. Rose went on for like what, 10 minutes, and you could tell that he
Yeah.
was really into it. This is a subject that is very dear to his heart, even though he's fully delved into the world of finance at this point. Occasionally I'm like, let's talk about stuff you like.
Yeah, and like zero prep. I didn't add no notes, nothing. This is all from
Nothing.
memory.
Yeah, just, yeah. See, I, like you said before we started recording, I know you a little too well. So, but I think, yeah, I think the idea is now probably to get into the depictions of vampires in media and how it has since grown over the last century or so. So I think about in the late 1910s, F.W. Monroe, who is the director of Nosferatu, there was a company called Prana Films, which I think produced Nosferatu. So they were in a long-standing battle with Bram Stoker's estate, who had died at this point, to try and get the rights to Dracula, and they were just not budging. Eventually, they decided to make a version of their own and just tweaked a bunch of things around, as Rohit mentioned. Like Dracula became Count Orlok, his appearances changed, a bunch of things were moved around, and some plot points were changed as to how how the vampire would be killed. And but for those of you who still ended up watching the movie, or just like, or whoever now, if you go back and watch, like I watched Nosferatu maybe a couple of years ago, and it's very clearly Dracula. Like even then, also it was very clearly Dracula. So much so that Bram Stoker's widow was like, "Dude, what?" And she ended up suing Prana Films and
Yeah,
had copies of the film destroyed.
yeah.
So,
Which is
mm,
I think also another reason why the movie is held in the regard it is. Nothing to
mm,
take away, right? Great example of German expressionism. Great movie
mhm,
in its own right, but the scarcity of copies also has like made people really, put it in high regard. Another small quiz funda here. I mean, I'm just going to say this because I
mm,
had made this question myself ages ago. So, like you said, a few changes that Nosferatu had made, one of which ended up adding to the vampiric lore, which is that in the end of at the end of the book, and any faithful Dracula adaptation, it ends with the team in a race against time with Dracula, who's trying to go back to his castle in Transylvania. And
mhm,
as he's about to reach and the sun is about to set, they finally catch up with him and they drive a stake through his heart. That's how the
mhm.
book slash any movie ends. But in the case of Nosferatu, again, spoiler alert for a 102-year-old movie. Uh,
Wait, hold up.
or
Are we spoil? Yeah, because I don't know what the sequel is, what the remake is going to do. So should we spoil it?
I don't know, so
But
it's
let's.
not really a spoiler, right? I mean, my guess is Robert Eggers is going to do something different, right? He's going to have his own
Hmm.
take on it. Also, I'm
Yeah.
technically
Okay. Fine.
spoiling
Yeah.
a movie that exists
Yeah. Go on. I
for,
mean,
for like
Haunted
for
Death is
over a
the first
century.
horror movie. Yeah. Yeah. Just go for it.
Yeah. No, so at the end of Nosferatu, when Count Orlok is essentially trying to finally get at whatever is the Mina Harker equivalent in Nosferatu. I forget the character's name.
Hmm.
He's about to suck her dry. Is when the sun rises and he can't stand the sunlight and he dies. So
Hmm.
in Dracula, while Count Dracula is uncomfortable with sunlight and it probably
Hmm.
hurts him, it doesn't kill him. Right? This
Hmm.
whole Dracula vampires dying when they're exposed to sunlight is Nosferatu's contribution to the vampiric lore.
Was this the question that
So
you
yeah,
asked in the quiz? This was the
yes. So the what was their contribution, and this answer was that they die from
nice,
sunlight.
very nice. So yeah, and like coming back to the point about how this film was into oblivion, the only reason prints of it exist to this day was because of international distribution. They couldn't get a hand on all copies, right? So somehow, somewhere, there was some in some the back of someone's little warehouse. There were copies of Nosferatu sitting, which in turn were able to be reproduced, and the film has since survived. And I mean, it essentially killed Piranha Films. That was the only film they ever made, and they filed for bankruptcy soon after. And so the legacy of Nosferatu continues. It's a clunky, not even clunky. That would be wrong. It's a twisted take on the Dracula origin story, or rather the lore. There's also another thing happening in the West at the time, right, which is the rise of the Hollywood golden age of cinema, so as we like to call it. So the Hollywood studios are coming through, and finally, Universal Studios uh, throws a probably what I would assume a shit ton of money at the Stoker estate and gets the rights to Dracula. And in 1931, Dracula starring Bela Lugosi hits movie theaters and becomes a cultural and worldwide smash hit. Did what it was supposed to do. It moved the focus away from Nosferatu as the ultimate depiction of the character. Now, anytime anybody thinks of Dracula, the first version is you think of the black and white.
From everything, right? Right from, like you said, the red and black cape, black on the outside,
Hmm.
red on the inside, with the high collar and the thick, vaguely Eastern European accent, to
Hmm.
the element of charm, right, which is something they thankfully retained or carried over from the book. Even in the book, he's a very charming figure. uh, his charm sort of brings your guard down, right, and allows Count Dracula to get closer to you and then start influencing you, and all of that. They carried over a lot of the right elements from the book in the Bela
Hmm.
Lugosi adaptation, and yeah, of course, people play around with the boundaries of what the story tells. Like if you look at the Christopher Lee Dracula movies, his depiction is very different. But in essence, the fact that his ambition to come to a new land, his ability to charm his way into a circle of people, and the sort of seductive menace is what I would call it, right? That sentiment carries over across most of these films, right? And that's something we've even as a culture sort of associated now in our heads. It's very strongly associated with vampires, right?
Yes.
Seductively menacing people. And again, there are, I don't know, probably hundreds or thousands of vampire centric properties across movies and TV shows. What we should and probably what we will try to do is, while this core template of what Dracula or vampires are exists in pop culture, we should ideally try to look at a few ways in which some properties have sort of played around with it, right? There have been
Hmm.
comedic takes on it. There have been more introspective, philosophical takes on it. The more straightforward ones, the ones which play up campy horror and less, there's so many variations of it. And I guess that's what Abhin and I are going to do for the rest of the episode, right? Let's just pick out the interpretations that especially stand out. And so what's the one that stands out for you the most?
I was so Christopher Lee's Dracula, Prince of Darkness was the first thing I saw, like of all, because I saw it as a child because it was also in color, and at the time you had a preference for things in color, and that is how I got introduced to the source material of Dracula. And I remember reading Bram Stoker's Dracula year when I was in seventh grade. It was in our school library, and I got to the chapter about Lucy Westinghouse is the character.
Westenra,
Uh,
Lucy Westenra.
Western Ra, yeah, right. So, oh, dude, when Lucy gets called out into the garden, or rather when she disappears, and
Yeah, yeah,
then there's a bit about her, like somebody seeing kids, like her with being with kids around in a park bench somewhere. I remember closing the book and just having nightmares
yeah.
for days. It's one of
That
those
section
really.
is damn creepy.
It's so creepy, especially the way it happens. Right, it's the whole
Yeah.
the windows opening and the voice calling Lucy, and it's just like one of those. It really stuck out. So I watched Christopher Lee's Dracula first, and I still remember it to this day, being like, "Oh, holy shit!" Being terrified of this man, and then here he is as Saruman. Then I think what was the next big introduction for me at the time was probably the Francis Ford Coppola film. I saw it very young. I saw it in it's a 1992 film, but I saw it, let's say, in the year 2000. I mean, this is a film I personally enjoy very much. It's very campy in its way. Like,
Yeah.
def
Yeah,
yeah,
if you're
it is.
discussing interpretations that stand out, then absolutely.
Yeah. So Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola. I mean, have you guys? If you haven't seen Megalopolis, this thing plays off like Apocalypse Now. Megalopolis was something. Anyway, so
Carfax.
Carfax. We've made fun of Keanu Reeves' accent on this in this movie several times. So it's a
Yeah,
star-studded cast, right? It's got
yeah.
Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker, Winona Ryder as Mina Harker. I think Anthony Hopkins plays Van Helsing.
Van
Gary
Helsing.
Oldman plays Dracula, this weird depiction of
The
Dracula
man
with
gives
two.
100%, however questionable the movie is, right? Gary Oldman, you can expect fucking 100% he'll give.
But it's the duality of Gary Oldman that's just stands out, right? Which is fucking insane because the first half he's in like heavy white makeup with these big bulbous things on his
Yeah,
head. And in the second half of the film is when he's got that, 90s bad boy long hair with glasses and a top hat. And you're just like, same character? Like, props to Gary Oldman, dude. Okay, a quick change of scenery. The network was quite ass, so I have now moved into the study. Hello, study. So let's continue the conversation from there.
the first time you
And
see the younger Gary Oldman, and I was like, hey, what's up? What- But yeah.
So yeah, I think one of this film's biggest contributions, or rather, like, the most fun aspects of it, or one of the biggest bits of trivia about it, is the whole 20 feet book that uh, our man ended up creating because he wanted to be in the shot with the train in the background. So that book you see that someone is like that has the letters written on it was apparently actually made. So Coppola's a madman.
Yeah, clearly. But yeah, the one other interpretation I want to talk, many more, but the interpretation I want to talk about, and I'm going to grab this before I'm sure Abhin will, if I miss this chance. So we're going to be jumping timelines a little bit, right? Some properties from later, some from
Yeah.
sooner. I'm going to quickly grab 2014's What We Do in the Shadows,
Uh-huh.
directed by Taika Waititi, starring Jermaine Clement is his name. Yeah, Jermaine Clement.
Yes. Flight of the Conchords.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I'm forgetting
Mm.
the other guys. There's two of them, but even though I'm a connoisseur of old school, like you know, true to its roots, horror representations of vampires, this is probably my single favorite representation of vampires. Right, so the story is about these four vampire roommates living in Auckland, one of New
Yes.
Zealand, right?
Mm.
And it shows how if vampires of prior centuries were to exist in modern day Auckland, what their lives would be like, right? And these guys are all idiosyncratic in their own ways as it is, right? And because they come from different eras, they have some historical hang-ups, cultural mismatch, and add to that the whole complexity of them being vampires, and they've sort of incorporated vampiric lore as well in very funny ways. Uh, so honestly, the movie doesn't really have a story, right? It's not like the characters have to move from point A to point B in the plot. It's just these guys goofing around being vampires. There's a whole bunch of werewolves as well, uh, and naturally the vampires are at odds with the werewolves, or as they say, we're werewolves, not swearwolves.
Uh, that line is so fucking perfect, especially when they're running to the like, "Hey, oi, oi," and one of the werewolves says something, and then the leader corrects him. And I
Reese,
remember watching it the first
the guy,
time.
what's the Reese? What? He's in Our Flag Means Death.
Sons.
Not Ifans. His name is Reese
No.
Darby or something. I'm forgetting his full name, but he's
Uh-huh.
there in Our Flag Means Death with Taika Waititi, which again is a great show. Unrelated, but shout out to Our Flag Means Death. But anyway, coming
Hmm.
back, so there's the whole swearwolves, not werewolves. But again, like I said, they incorporate vampiric lore in funny ways. My one of my favorite scenes or sequences in the movie is when they need to dress up to get out, right? And what do most people do when they dress up? They look at themselves in the mirror to see how they look. And vampires can't be seen in the mirror.
Gone. Yeah.
So you have these guys critiquing each other's fashion, saying, hey, this is looking a little off. And without any mirror to look at, they need to like make these corrections and they keep bumbling around about it. And it's hilarious. It's hilarious.
If you've not seen What We Do in the Shadows, I think it got remade into a television show as well.
Yeah.
So it lives on as a television show on FX or something. I highly recommend it. It is important that you go watch this
Yeah.
movie.
I haven't seen the show.
It's
I've heard it is
like,
as good as the movie. It's just I don't want to like I just want to
mm,
have consumed the movie. I don't want to tarnish it. However good the TV show is, all due
no,
respect to it.
yeah. So I kind of want to like go back to the 90s for a bit because two very important things happened in the 90s. I mean, you have obviously, I think the 90s was like the year of the decade of vampires, given the amount of
Yeah.
media that it generated across like even animation to a certain degree. But I want to start with 93's Interview with the Vampire, which is a very like different take on the genre.
Yeah.
It's starring and I mean it's based off Anne Rice's books, and I think Anne Rice's books were probably the first times vampires were made to seem a little more human.
The aspect of existentialism that would come from air quotes immortality, right?
Hmm.
There is like the Dracula novel alludes to it while he's talking to Harker. He says, "My ancestors were the voivodes of Transylvania. And from the
Mm.
15th century onwards, we've been in battles. We fought against the Ottomans on the plains of XYZ. He rattles off a bunch of famous
Mm.
battle names. What we as the reader are meant to understand is it is actually himself from the 15th century
Hmm.
to this date. But at this point, Jonathan Harker doesn't know that Dracula is an immortal vampire. Immortality is also a sort of trap beyond a certain point of time,
Because yeah.
and the movies don't make much mention of it. But Anne Rice probably, like, I don't know if it was consciously, subconsciously, she's latched onto that idea, right? And in fact, that's
Hmm.
one of the things Lestat really articulates through the course of the movie. It's the burden of having to live so long, having to see the your loved ones. You have two options: either you turn them and bring them on to turn them into vampires, and then they live with the same burden that you do, or you love them from afar and you watch them die, and everyone who you cared for goes away, and eventually it's you, and you have to find company in fellow vampires, which is not always as easy as it seems, right? I mean, another
Hmm.
movie which touches upon this sentiment. Only in this case, you have two people who did do kind of find each other. Is Jim Jarmusch's Only Lovers Left Alive. Again,
Hmm.
I'm forgetting Tilda Swinton, and I'm forgetting who the male is.
Tom Hiddleston.
Tom Hiddleston, where they're both
Hmm.
vampires, and uh, they're sort of the only two vampires left, and they're trying to navigate what is now like a degrading, decaying, very materialistic world, right? And they're trying to sort of marry their old-timey sensibilities to. So there's this entire
Hmm.
fascinating angle to the vampiric lore, which Only Lovers Left Alive, but more importantly, the Anne Rice novels really sort of build on, right? And that's the part I was saying, this approach to the world of vampires sort of gives it some philosophical heft, right? They're not just creatures to be reviled. They have their own thoughts, feelings. It humanizes them, as ironic as that sounds. It does humanize them.
And there are like several other depictions of it. I think the more common one being was, I think there is a 2000s film. So there's this guy called uh, Yoshiaki Kawajiri, who is a renowned anime director. He's directed some insane Jap animation kind of stuff, Ninja Scroll, as well as Wicked City, a film which will never be made today. If you have seen Wicked City, it's one of the most stylized films I've ever seen, but it's also an extremely violent film, especially towards women. Not a great watch if you're like easily this thing, squeamish. But he created Vampire Hunter D, which is again an 80s property, and it's about this damper, or like, this half human half vampire who's hunting other vampires. Now you know this story because there was another huge property that came out in the 90s that again is an old Marvel superhero that gave, in my opinion, there are three films, but two of them I think are pretty damn good. But we'll get to that. I want to talk about Vampire Hunter D because it explores similar themes. It explores, there's a vampire that has kidnapped the daughter of a local Viscount, and the Viscount hires D, or the Damphir, to go after them, only for him to realize that they haven't exactly, like, the vampire hasn't exactly kidnapped the daughter as much as they've run away together to be together. And it explores those themes while delivering a kick-ass, kinetic, fluid animated film that, if you have not seen, I really implore you to watch it. And animation is like, the medium has lost all sense of style and all sense of kinetic energy. This is one of those great films that you must check out, in my opinion. It kind of ends on a bit of a whimper. Is That's the only critique I have of it. But I think in terms of a classic vampire story done well, this is pretty much up there. Now coming back to Blade, which kind of 1998, and then in 2002 Blade 2, they again pushed the idea of the vampire and made him a lot more cool. Like, what if a half human half vampire were to exist, and what if he was just going to try and eliminate the bad guys? And Blade was born. And Blade 2, I think Rohit has had, we've spoken about this in the past, about how that film gave him nightmares,
Yeah.
and how the concept of the ascended vampires, I forget what they're called, uh, that whole, the mouth open, like, I think Guillermo del Toro again added to the lore. I'm sorry if I'm triggering some
Yeah,
sort of PTSD for you.
it's cool. I mean, I'm not going to talk about it, but I'll happily hear you.
Yeah, so no, it's just the he evolved the whole evolved vampire lore that he added to it was again a very cool taste. like vampires, like actual other vampires hunting out the old school vampires in a bid to get to the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
That I found fascinating, and I think it's very much a film that has stood the test of time. I think there are certain points in the film you're just like, okay, I can see this weird new metal edginess thing that you were going for at the
I
time,
like
but
it. I like the whole
ve-
steampunk techno spin on vampires.
exactly,
I
yeah.
love it.
And I think even Underworld around the time was a
Yeah.
kind of a dark, gothic, modern take on it, which I found to be quite interesting.
Underworld, the first movie is really good, and in my opinion, then it just falls off a cliff quality wise. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't even bothered. Don't even remember, say, watching Underworld 2. Underworld 1 with
Rise
Michael
of the
Sheen
Lycans
and
was
Kate
good though,
Beckinsale.
with yeah,
Yeah.
Michael Sheen. Yeah, Michael Sheen, not Martin Sheen. Yeah, Michael Sheen.
Michael Sheen is in the first one.
He's in the first one also. He's there very briefly,
Hmm.
and then the Rise of the Lycans is the prequel about him and Rana Mitra's characters falling in love. He's a werewolf,
Oh, yeah.
and yeah, that's the whole. So,
Oh, okay.
Rise of the Lycans is expanding upon the story of the brief cameo that Michael Sheen has in the first movie.
Yeah, I
Cameo, a
remember
lot of
watching,
random
like,
stuff.
Bill Nye is in the first, right? Bill, yeah, yeah, Bill Nye
Yeah, Will Nye is
is
in the first one.
the.
Yeah, so I completely agree with your point on Underworld, yes, but more so on Blade. For me, I love the third movie, or I wouldn't say I love the third movie. The third movie is very rewatchable for me. It's not a good movie.
The third Blade
The third,
movie.
Blade Trinity. Yeah,
Wow.
it's very rewatchable because of Ryan Reynolds. I consider it his official, unofficial audition for Deadpool because he just does not shut up in
Hmm.
that movie. And of course, we have
Hmm.
all of this coming back in. I'm not going to talk about Deadpool and Wolverine because it's still too fresh for us to discuss spoilers.
But did you watch it finally?
I watched it on Hotstar. It's a movie. It's not that good.
It's a movie. Did you? But were you like? Was it spoiled for you in a certain degree, or did you
I
just
mean,
like?
I've told you this. I don't care about spoilers. I knew all of the things that were meant to happen. I would have liked for there to
Hmm.
be a story to go along with all the gratuitous cameos.
Yeah, yeah. This is. I will leave. I will leave it.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a whole other
It's
conversation.
for
But
another episode. But yeah, not a
yeah.
great movie.
Hmm.
But anyways, I actually do like it. I even like. I know. I don't know the name of the guy, the elder brother from Prison Break who plays Dracula in Blade Trinity.
Hmm.
Uh, I don't mind the portrayal. I love the music. Jessica Biel is serviceable. I don't know why. I think I just saw it a lot growing up, so it's I have a sort of
Hmm.
affinity to it. I think out of the three, fuck the second one. I'm not going to talk about it.
And the second one is probably the best,
Yeah,
dude.
no, no, it is probably the best. I just don't want to talk about it.
Hmm.
I love the first one as well. Stephen Dorff plays a good. I forgot the name of the character, but he plays a good vampire.
Frost, Declan
Declan
Frost.
Frost, yes, plays a good Declan Frost, and
Hmm.
of course the immortal line. Some motherfuckers always trying to
Hmm.
skate
This was
uphill.
what we were up to.
Love it, love it. So yeah, love Blade.
If Deadpool 3 did one thing right, it just made sure that was in the film.
Yes, but it
Hmm.
felt out of place.
Hmm.
Anyways, I don't want to talk.
Yeah.
It felt shoehorned like most of the
Hmm.
movie. But anyways,
Yeah.
like I was saying, I love Blade. I'm fairly uh, lukewarm on the Underworld, but the first movie and Rise of the Lycans, good. Let's skip past the whole Twilight hot mess because that's.
We kind of need to talk about it, man. I
Oh, you're
don't think we can
saying
skip past it without.
like outlier depiction.
It's not even the outlier depiction, it's because of the phenomenon it ended up becoming, right? Like, this is now. So, okay, I don't know if I've spoken about this on prior episodes. I think I have. But the story about how I got into the Twilight series, so why I started reading the Twilight series. It is, as always, with Teenage Abin was because of a girl. And she suggested I read the book, and I said, sure, cool. And my cousins at the same time were like, oh,
Been
dude,
there,
Twilight,
done
you
that.
should totally check it out. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the first book, I remember trudging through it, and I was like, God, this is frustrating. The premise, like, if someone the elevator pitch for the book was pretty interesting. There is a vampire who falls in love with the girl, but he can't really but he's trying to stop himself from being with her because there's a whole, he doesn't want to kill her. Okay, interesting premise. What happened soon after was, like, when I started reading the book, and I remember going to the local crosswords here and buying the book. And I remember my sister at the time was a voracious reader, and she kind of was hounding me for the book. And I said, let me finish it, I'll give it to you. And with great difficulty, I got to the end, and I was very upset, and I gave it to her, and she found it horrible as well. But we both got through the end. We got through the entire series, and the movies have now. like it glamorized the vampire. It made the 2008 to 2012, like the whole pale, brooding vampire like it brought the, it gave the emo kids something to like latch onto. I'd say it made the emo kid cool, is what I was, how I would say. And I mean, call it what you want, right? I mean, I feel like it was an important step for in like in film legacy,
I
because Robert
guess.
Pattinson has the career he has
Yeah, I
because of
guess Robert
Twilight.
Pattinson. I'll concede that. If nothing else, if not, I mean, sure. I don't think Cedric Diggory in and of itself would have been the stepping stone to the career he has today, and it gave
Yeah,
him the financial freedom to do the kind of roles that he does now, for which we are eternally thankful. So, if nothing else, yes, I don't disagree with what you're saying in that however much we might like or dislike it, Twilight has contributed to the vampire genre, yes. And at large, it has given us this avatar of Robert Pattinson, who has not a single fuck to give about the kind of movies he makes, which is beautiful. So yeah, I sure.
yeah. The movies serve as great drinking game fuel, is how I'd say. The first movie, especially where Robert Pattinson is doing his at utmost best to get fired, it's just, oh man, it is such a trip to just watch that movie and like get pop out a bottle and just start going through it, because it's so fucking hilarious. I think that it's very much in the party movies kind of scene, is how I best put it, which is kind of sad given what the kind of, the kind of conversations we've been having leading up to about vampires. We have to like address the twilightification of it. But
Dude, and like
like you
everyone
said,
in the
right,
movie is
capitalism.
so fucking white, right? Except for that one black
Yeah.
vampire. I half expected they'd be like, fuck you, this is a sundown town. Get the fuck out of here before before sundown. It's so fucking right. Like South Africans in the 90s would have been like, these are our people. Get them here.
Oh my god.
Fucking crazy.
I think we've missed a fair few of them.
I mean, yeah,
We've
there's so
let the
many.
right
Yeah,
people.
let the right one in
Yeah,
is again. Don't watch the English remake. Watch the Swedish original. It's a
what's
lot
the
better.
Swedish one? Yeah.
It's a lot more sparse, right? I don't know why Hollywood, when it adapts
Hmm.
movies, cannot stop itself from adding exposition, adding unnecessary character motivation. With horror movies, less is always more. So I don't know. Like mainstream Hollywood does not seem to get it right. You have to leave it to the authors like Eggers and co to sort of do it right. But yeah, let the right one in. The Swedish one. Another movie I would like to recommend. I haven't seen it yet myself. 2024's
Hmm.
Abigail, uh, which
Oh yes, I found that to be a very interesting premise, which is a movie I need to watch.
yeah, same.
And I
I saw
didn't.
the
I
premise.
thought
I
it was
was like,
another run of
fuck
run.
yeah! When I get a weekend free and Poonam's not around, this is definitely one I'm firing up.
The premise is like it's instant. Oh, I'm hooked.
Yeah,
I didn't even know the premise. I thought it was just one more like possessed child story, but no,
yeah.
it's very interesting. The blurb itself was enough for me to be like, I'm gonna get into that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, again, I'm sure there's a lot of movies we've not talked about. These are just, things that are coming off the top of our head. And yes, there are TV shows that we haven't mentioned, right? I don't know if you watched Buffy. I haven't, but if you have thoughts,
Dude, I was too young to remember Buffy, but I mean, obviously, Sarah Michelle Gellar, a huge part of my childhood. Buffy,
I want to
Angel,
know.
Archangel. Yeah, no, it's not nothing that sinister. So anyway, it's just I don't remember Buffy. I just remember like little bits of it where the Vampire Slayer again huge. The 90s, a big chunk. My cousins were really into it, so a big chunk of the 90s we're all they were all big Buffy fans. Buffy being one, the second being True Blood, a show I tried getting into, and I don't know why I've not gone back to it. It's a good show. I really liked the first episode.
It's like Sons of
Uh,
Anarchy meets some Showtime sex
vampires.
shows, is how I've sort of gauged it to be. Even I haven't watched it. I don't know if it's just me, but like I wouldn't want to watch. I can watch a movie about vampires. TV show about vampires is very demanding. I'm like, hey, I don't think I can care about these characters for this long.
I think the perfect solution to that is Castlevania.
I think Castlevania,
So
the Netflix one, amazing.
yeah, yeah. Castlevania's the first season is, and it's Castlevania is based on the games by Konami. The first season, I think, is a great entry point into like vampire lore because there's there's Dracula, and Dracula has this is married to this woman who gets accused of being a witch and then being killed. And Dracula comes says, "Okay, I will give you 5 days to bring me the guy responsible for
Yeah,
this, or I will kill the entire town." And it just takes off from there.
yeah,
Right? It's just pure. It's I'm still watching Nocturne right now, which is where they have a character based on Elizabeth Bathory. So and they're having another season as well, which is I think based on Symphony of the Night, which is the hugely popular Castlevania game.
nice,
I really like what Castlevania is doing as part of it. I think if you I was pitching Vampire Hunter D to you, Vampire Hunter D is thematically very similar to Castlevania.
nice.
So
I'm definitely
it's a
excited. Nah, I'll definitely check it. I liked Castlevania. Very straightforward. I mean,
mhm.
not too nuanced, right? Nuanced, but in the right ways.
Yeah,
You know exactly who to root
exactly.
for. You have clear good guys.
Mhm.
Nuance in the character of Dracula, yes, you understand why he's angry, you understand why he's out to burn the world, and yet you're like, don't do it. And then you have Alucard who comes into you understand that why people have the motivations they do, and you can yet sympathize with again air quotes the bad guy Dracula. But naming of Alucard
Mhm.
is lazy as fuck, bro. It's like Dracula ulta kar do Alucard. You spend 30
It's a fun,
seconds
yeah,
naming this
yeah.
character. Dracula's son, Alucard.
Like, yes. Uh, we should like I think as we wrap this up, I kind of wanted to like jump back into the films for a bit because I want to talk about Shadow of the Vampire, a movie I discovered very recently, and the premise itself is so cool. So it takes the whole Hollywood concept of the behind the scenes of a fabled Hollywood production and adds a nice little twist to it. The fact that the director F.W. Monroe apparently creates this Faustian deal and gets Max Schreck, who plays Count Orlok in the original Nosferatu. So the movie is F.W. Monroe shooting Nosferatu, the behind the scenes of Nosferatu.
Yeah, and it's
But
got yeah, it has John
mm,
Malkovich playing more now. It has William Dafoe playing Max Schreck. William Dafoe just generally looks creepy also, no offense to him. Uh,
mm,
and so the premise of the story is the cast and crew of Nosferatu, as they are shooting the film, begin to suspect that Max Schreck is not acting, but he's a legit vampire.
mm,
And over the course of the movie, I think you, as the viewer, sort of are told fairly early that yes, he is one. And the rest of the movie is everybody
mm,
else figuring it out and sort of navigating that situation, right? Again, I'd made a question on this as well. So clearly, I've tried to slip
mm,
in my vampire agenda in my quiz questions across the years. But yeah,
mm.
sounds like a great premise. I never knew where to find it, but now that you told me, Abin, that it's there in its entirety on YouTube, I know what I'm doing when I have a couple of hours spare.
Yes. Anything else we've missed that we haven't covered? Oh yeah, I mean, let's end it on this. I was for a brief phase between 2009 to 2011. I was really into the Vampire Diaries.
I never got into it.
It's just I did get into it, and then it got CW'd, right? Which is by which I mean is they don't know when to end a show, so naturally it means it should get beaten over the head repeatedly till like it's like flogging a dead horse, and it just never ended. There was an offshoot called the Originals, which I never got into. Very interesting characters. Nice little take. I mean, the whole teen romance meets it's what Twilight should have been, in my opinion. It's a better take on Twilight on the whole Twilight tropes. But yeah, that happened, and there are people who still swear by it. All 7 seasons. I wasn't one of them.
7 fucking season? No way, dude. Like Breaking Bad
Yeah.
got over sooner than that. What are you doing?
No, it's 23 episodes. Old school cable
Oh
television.
my God, no. But
Mm.
I mean, to end the episode, we should circle back to what started it all and spend a couple of minutes hyping people about the movie because Robert Eggers
Yes.
deserves to be far more mainstream than he is. Without exaggerating or I don't want to overstate it. Robert Eggers is a fucking master of horror.
Yeah, dude. He's
Atmospheric
I like
horror, the
apparently.
camera work,
Yes.
sudden pans in and out, and just characters where you don't. you have a glimpse of their motivation, but he does not reveal the entirety of the character to you, and sort of allows you to fill in those blanks
Make your own
yourself, make
conclusions.
your own
Yeah.
conclusions. I fucking love Robert Eggers, man.
I know Rohit's a very busy guy, but I will drag his ass for Nosferatu when it releases upon opening weekend.
Dude, like
We'll,
I love Robert Eggers. I love vampire movies. When I heard this announcement, I was like, are you kidding me? Dude, is he actually doing this? It is going to be
yeah,
so
and
cool.
performances seem to be off the charts as well. Apparently, Lily Rose Depp is excellent,
Which
which
is
is explains why
surprising,
she did
yeah,
the
because
idol
when I
thing.
saw casting like Lily Rose Depp, okay, but seems like
No, somewhere genetics needs to play a part, no? So it's just, but I'm curious for it. I'm curious to see how this movie plays out.
curious
We shall
is,
go for it.
yeah,
We shall give
yeah,
thoughts.
yeah, it's going to be epic. But yeah,
And
find
yeah,
a theater near you where it plays, and if you love horror, if you love vampires, or if you just love good storytelling, where the director treats you as an intelligent audience, please seek out a theater near you and go watch Nosferatu.
and also to like end this episode, if we've missed a certain your favorite vampire piece of media, please let us know what you think. Like what films we should watch. What are some of your favorites? I'll give us a little poll or a little question box that you can fill in. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you. I think you're like 6% of our audience,
Yeah,
which isn't a lot,
like,
but
share,
thank you for
subscribe. I don't even know what the
please
right,
subscribe.
yeah.
Rohit needs funding. I need to throw some sort of a thing. I also need funding.
Yes,
Mm, mm.
but yeah,
Okay, but cool. We'll we'll see you on the next week's episode. Take
bye
care.
bye.